Monday morning, the first stretches are pretty tight.
Health costs for the severely wounded, however, are a different story. Consider Marine Sergeant Eddie Ryan, age 23. Ryan was in Iraq when he was shot in the head by friendly fire from an Army tank 2 years ago. He's now living at home in rural Ellenville, New York.
Breathe. Breathe.
As is common among the severely brain injured, Ryan lost much of his motor control. He now works regularly with physical therapists like Julie Feynman to try to restore it.
We're going to roll over. You ready?
Ah! No!
He's made a lot of progress since I've worked with him since August. Progress from this point on tends to be slower.
Ryan's mother, Angie, describes his many challenges.
He has an occasional seizure here and there, a lot of frustrations. He screams a lot, and that's due partly because of the injury. Part of it is due to spasms and pains he gets in his legs and arms.
No!
Although the VA initially encouraged his family to place Eddie Ryan in assisted care, it eventually agreed to pay for a range of services so he could live at home. The VA told us those outlays for Ryan now run about $228,000 a year.
Up here. Push up. Push up.
Additional one-time payments for prosthetics, housing, and a brain injury insurance payment totaled almost $182,000. Harvard professor Bilmes told us that if the VA's support for Eddie Ryan stays relatively constant over the next 40 years, the cost of his care alone could reach anywhere from $8 million to $17 million. But as much as the nation will spend on care of the severely wounded, many experts make the argument that it should be spending even more. That's because large care gaps remain, both within the VA and in the broader community.
I'm going to lift your arm up here and bring it under you. Okay?
Dr. John Boos recently retired as the VA's National Director for Neurology, overseeing much of the care of brain injury patients. The VA has been a national leader in caring for TBI since the first Gulf War.
One of the things that the VA does very well, and in all candor, much better than the private sector, is in continuity of care. If from preventive services through acute care, through chronic care, long-term care, rehabilitation. So I think in many ways the VA is really a standard in that kind of care delivery.
But even Boos thinks the VA could still stand to shore up some services. That includes preparing for long-term side effects of brain injury, like epilepsy.
There has been a reduction in epilepsy services in the VA over the several years. There should be a system of sophisticated epilepsy centers which can do monitoring and also surgery as needed. And the possibility of having private providers in areas underserved by VA needs to be looked in very carefully.
Partnering with more private healthcare providers may be more urgent than ever, since many service members have been recruited from rural communities, far from urban centers. Eddie Ryan's home is in the Catskills, for example, nearly 2 hours from the nearest VA hospital in Albany, New York. So the VA contracts with a private agency to line up private therapists and health aides.
No!
But both the VA and the Ryans told us it's been a struggle for the private agency to find enough caregivers who meet the family's preferences. The Ryans say they had to push to get the VA to agree to pay for services of a music therapist to help Eddie with his memory and speech. The VA has now agreed to do that. Now the Ryans want coverage for a massage therapist as well. Chris Ryan is Eddie's father.
He's not getting what he needs. We're even paying out of pocket, you know? And my wife has all of the bills, and we're doing as much as we possibly can through, you know, people putting out fundraisers for Eddie, and we're spending up to $800 a week.
Brain injury case manager Mason told us a key underlying problem in such cases is a shortage of health professionals caring for all brain injuries. That's not just the wounded from Iraq and Afghanistan, but also the estimated 1.2 million brain injuries that take place in the U.S. each year.
I think America in general wasn't aware of the challenges that brain injury survivors have been facing for decades, that they just have not been able to get the care that they need.
To help plug the gaps, Dr. Kussman told us the VA has now set up 21 so-called polytrauma centers with expertise in brain injury around the country.
To be able to get closer to where the patients were going so they don't have to travel as far. We've also put polytrauma treatment teams in all our VA medical centers that have a special expertise to at least evaluate and do the physical therapy, coordinate with telemedicine and telehealth to get this expertise as far forward and as far as close to the way the veterans live.
More specifics on what's needed to improve care for the seriously injured may emerge from government commissions created after the disclosure of problems at Walter Reed. Meanwhile, Congress is now weighing emergency spending bills that would add $3.5 billion for health care to this year's budgets at the Defense Department and VA. They'd include more support for victims of brain injury as well as for amputees.
Just like a tree that's planted by the water, we shall not be moved.
Next week, an independent panel is expected to call for better treatment for severely brain-injured patients. That panel is headed by two former secretaries of the Army. It was appointed by Defense Secretary Robert Gates.